Ace stopped mid-note. He lifted his head. He looked at the front row. He recognized that voice. He lowered his guitar. And he walked off the stage. 18,000 people held their breath. The note hung in the air, unresolved, incomplete, wrong. A Les Paul through a Marshall stack doesn't ask permission to fade. It demands attention until the player decides otherwise. But Ace Frehley had decided otherwise. The spotlight followed him to the edge of the stage. He stood there for 3 seconds that felt like 3 minutes, guitar hanging from the strap against his hip, his hand no longer on the neck, his eyes scanning the front row. The rest of the band kept playing for maybe 2 measures before they realized. The rhythm guitarist looked over. The bassist stopped. The drummer played 4 more beats alone before the silence became absolute. Ace stepped down from the stage. Not toward the wings. Not backstage. Down. Into the audience. Into the barrier space where security usually kept fans at arm's length. 18,000 people in the Philadelphia Spectrum watched a man who never explained himself do something inexplicable. Ace stopped mid-note, raised his head, and looked toward the front row, and when he recognized that voice, he set his guitar down and walked off stage into the crowd. 18,000 people held their breath. How did it come to this? The date was March 17, 1978. The tour had been brutal. 32 cities in 41 days. Ace Frehley was tired in a way that sleep couldn't fix. Not physically tired. Tired of being the Spaceman. Tired of makeup. Tired of pyrotechnics. Tired of the character he wore like a second skin that was starting to suffocate the man underneath. They called him the showman of the group. The one with the smoking guitar. The one who shot rockets from his Les Paul during solos. They loved the spectacle. They screamed for the effects. They wanted explosions. But Ace Frehley didn't get into music to be a magician. He got into it to play. To bend strings and find notes that lived in the spaces between what was written and what was felt. The Philadelphia show was supposed to be routine. Standard setlist. Standard pyro, standard everything. Ace had played Shock Me, his signature solo showcase, hundreds of times. He knew exactly where to trigger the smoke. Exactly when to hit the pedal that made the rocket fire from the guitar headstock. Exactly how long to hold the final sustained note while the crowd roared. He'd done it all perfectly tonight. The smoke had billowed on cue. The rocket had fired. The note had sustained. The crowd had roared. And then, in the 2-second gap between the end of his solo and the return of the full band, Ace heard it. A voice from the front row. Male. Older. Cutting through 18,000 people with the precision of someone who knew exactly when to speak so a specific person would hear. Just play it clean, Ace. Just once. Ace's hands froze on the fretboard. The band came back in. The song continued. But Ace wasn't playing anymore. His fingers were on the strings but they weren't moving. The guitar was live but silent. The rhythm section carried the song without him for 8 measures before anyone noticed. When they did notice, the whole thing fell apart. The rhythm guitarist turned concerned. The bassist stepped to the edge of his platform, trying to see what was wrong. The drummer played a fill that was meant to signal, "Something's happening," to the sound booth. Ace lowered his guitar. He walked to the front of the stage. He looked down into the front row. An old man stood there. Maybe 65, maybe 70. Gray hair. Worn leather jacket. Hands resting on the barrier. Not reaching, not grabbing, just resting. He wasn't screaming like the fans around him. He wasn't holding up a sign or a lighter or anything asking for attention. He was just standing there, looking at Ace with eyes that remembered something. Ace stared at him. Recognition flickered across his face, not the public face, not the Spaceman, but the actual man underneath. Paul Daniel Frehley from the Bronx, who'd learned guitar on a Yamaha acoustic his father bought from a pawn shop. The old man nodded once. Simple. Economical. Ace set his guitar down. Not carefully. Just set it down on the stage, still plugged in, feedback starting to whine through the marshals. The crowd didn't know what to do. Some screamed. Some went silent. Most just stared. Ace walked to the edge of the stage, sat down, and lowered himself off the platform into the security gap. His boots hit the concrete floor of the venue. 2 security guards moved toward him reflexively, then stopped, unsure. He wasn't being attacked. He wasn't crowd surfing. He was just walking. He walked to the barrier. He stood in front of the old man. "Clean," the old man said. Not a question. Not a request. Just a reminder. Ace nodded. Ace didn't defend himself. He never did. To understand that moment, you need to understand 1968. Ace Frehley was 17 years old. School dropout. No prospects. Living in his parents' apartment in the Bronx, practicing guitar 8 hours a day because it was the only thing that made sense. He wasn't good yet, not the way he'd become good. But he was hungry. He played in a band called The Outrage. They did covers at high school dances and bar mitzvahs. Beatles songs. Stones songs. Whatever paid $20 and free beer. Ace played rhythm because the lead guitarist, Tommy, was older and claimed seniority. Tommy was flashy. Lots of effects. Wah pedals. Fuzz boxes. He'd stand on the amps during solos. The crowds loved it. But Ace noticed something. Tommy played the same licks every time. Same positions. Same patterns. Flashy, but repetitive. One night after a gig at a VFW hall, an old man approached Ace while he was packing his guitar. The man's name was Joseph Marino. He'd played jazz guitar in New York clubs during the 40s and 50s. Small clubs. Underground places. He'd played with people whose names were footnotes in music history, not because they weren't brilliant, but because jazz was an underground art form that history didn't always record. Joseph was old then. Probably 60, which seemed ancient to teenage Ace. He had gnarled hands from arthritis. Couldn't play anymore. But he still came to shows. He still listened. "You're playing rhythm," Joseph said. "Yeah," Ace said. "Tommy does the leads." "Tommy does the effects," Joseph corrected. "That's not the same thing." Ace didn't know how to respond to that. Joseph pulled a business card from his wallet. It was old, yellowed, with a phone number handwritten in fading ink. "You want to learn to actually play, call me. I'll teach you. No charge." Ace took the card. "Why would you do that?" "Because you're playing 8 hours a day in your bedroom. I can hear it through your parents' window when I walk by. Most kids give up after 2 weeks. You've been going for 3 years. That means something." Ace stared at the card. "What would you teach me?" "How to play clean," Joseph said. "No effects. No smoke. Just you and the guitar and the note. If you can make someone feel something with just that, then you can add all the other stuff later. But if you start with the other stuff, you'll never learn the real thing." Ace called him 2 days later. For the next 18 months, every Tuesday and Thursday evening, Ace took the subway to Joseph's apartment in Queens. A cramped studio with an old Gibson ES-175 and a tiny Fender amp. No pedals. No effects. Just guitar and amp. Joseph taught him the old way. Jazz chords. Melodic phrasing. How to make a single note speak. How to bend a string so it sounded like crying. How to use silence as part of the music instead of just space between notes. "Effects are tools," Joseph said during one lesson. "But if you're hiding behind them, you're not playing music. You're playing tricks. And tricks get boring." Ace absorbed everything. He practiced until his fingers bled. He learned to play phrases that didn't need distortion to hit hard. He learned to make a clean tone sing. "Remember this," Joseph said during what would be their last lesson. "People will love the fire and the smoke. They'll scream for the explosions. But the musicians, the real ones, they'll remember the notes you played when everything else was quiet." 3 weeks later, Joseph Marino died of a heart attack. Ace never got to thank him properly. Never got to tell him that everything he learned about actually playing, not performing, but playing, came from those Tuesday and Thursday evenings in Queens. When Ace joined KISS 5 years later, he brought Joseph's lessons with him. But he also brought the smoke and the fire, because that's what the band needed. That's what the show demanded. The smoking guitar. The rocket. The Spaceman persona. Ace became famous for the effects. The spectacle. The showmanship. And somewhere in the success, in the platinum albums and the sold-out arenas and the makeup and the pyrotechnics, Joseph Marino's lessons became a quiet thing Ace did in hotel rooms when no one was watching. Subscribe and leave a comment, because some moments only make sense when we remember them together. The old man at the Philadelphia Spectrum wasn't Joseph Marino. Joseph had been dead for 5 years by 1978. But he'd been Joseph's friend. Another jazz musician from the old New York club scene. His name was Vincent Shaw, and he'd watched Joseph teach that skinny kid from the Bronx for 18 months. He'd heard Joseph talk about the kid who's going to actually learn it. When KISS exploded into mainstream success, Vincent had watched from a distance. He'd seen Ace become the Spaceman. He'd seen the effects and the smoke and the character. And he'd wondered if Joseph's lessons had survived the success. Tonight, Vincent had come to the Philadelphia Spectrum with a simple mission: to see if Paul Daniel Frehley from the Bronx was still in there somewhere underneath the makeup and the rockets. He'd waited through the whole show. Through Detroit Rock City, and Deuce, and Love Gun. Through all the hits. He'd watched Ace play perfectly, every effect triggered on cue, every solo executed flawlessly, every rocket fired at exactly the right moment. And then during Shock Me, when Ace finished his solo and there was that 2-second gap before the band came back in, Vincent had spoken 6 words he knew would cut through everything. Just play it clean, Ace. Just once. Joseph's phrase. The thing he used to say every time Ace reached for an effect pedal during those lessons. Just play it clean first. Prove you can make it work without the tricks. Then add whatever you want. Now Ace stood in front of Vincent at the barrier, and 18,000 people didn't know what they were witnessing. Joseph sent me, Vincent said, even though that wasn't literally true. He wanted me to hear you play clean. Just once. The way he taught you. Ace stared at him. The crowd was getting restless. Security was closing in. The band was standing on stage not knowing what to do. Ace turned around. He walked back to the stage. He pulled himself up. He picked up his guitar. He walked to his amp rack. He reached behind it and started unplugging things. The effects chain. The pedals. The smoke trigger. The rocket mechanism. Everything that made the guitar do anything except be a guitar through an amplifier. The crowd didn't understand what was happening. Neither did the band. The rhythm guitarist stepped forward, concerned. Ace, what are you doing? We're in the middle of a show. Ace didn't respond. He unplugged the last effect. He walked back to center stage. Just him, his Les Paul, and a straight cable to a Marshall stack. No effects. No processing. Just guitar and amp. He looked at Vincent in the front row. Vincent nodded. Away from the spotlight, Ace made a choice no one expected. Ace played. Not Shock Me. Not any KISS song. He played something older. A jazz melody Joseph had taught him. Clean. No distortion. Just fingers and strings and wood and wire. Simple. Pure. The arena fell silent. 18,000 people stopped screaming and just listened. The melody bent and curved like a conversation. It asked questions and answered them. It didn't need smoke or rockets or explosions. It just needed to be heard. When the last note faded, Ace lowered his guitar. He looked at Vincent. Vincent nodded once. Then he turned and walked toward the exit. Mission complete. The arena erupted. Not the usual roar. Something different. Respect. Share and subscribe. Some stories deserve to be remembered. Ace plugged the effects back in. The band finished the show. The pyro fired. The rockets launched. The spaceman returned. But backstage afterward, Ace put Joseph's business card, the one he'd carried in his wallet for 10 years, in a frame. He never played another show without looking at it first. Vincent Shaw died 3 years later. At his funeral, someone found a note in his pocket. The kid remembered. Joseph was right. Ace Frehley never spoke about that night publicly. He didn't need to. The musicians who were there understood. And sometimes that's enough.